Okay, good morning, everyone, and let's start this particular discussion on the assignment, for the aspects of human physiology. So what you see on the screen at your end is basically the assignment brief, which has been issued by Ascentis. And this assignment, for the unit that we've completed, which is aspects of human physiology, has questions, 4 questions in it. So I don't know if some of you have managed to see the assignment brief before we, started this session. This assignment brief is available on Moodle, and this particular unit is graded. So that means you should be able to achieve a grade like pass, merit, or distinction. And there are some ways in which, obviously, this assignment, we have to do this in the class. It is like a handwritten examination kind of an assignment. So what we are going to do in today's session is to basically discuss how this part is going to be, done in the class, and how do you do it under the examination conditions. Now, when you look at this particular unit, what I want to do is start from the very basic. Some of us are still struggling, with regards to how to look at, submitting an assignment, and in some cases, primarily sending us PDF documents, which obviously, cannot be marked or cannot be easily marked. So from my point of view, I have Christine, who's still joining in, maybe through the phone or whatever. And, I have Solil, Hiss, and then Martina. So basically what we need to be able to do is, when you submit your assignment, some of you are doing it perfectly well. So what I would suggest is you fill in your name, open the Word document. Once the Word document is downloaded and opened, please make sure that you fill in the name. And then when you fill in the name, please fill these details in, because this is something which is required to be done. So we started this particular unit, sometime on, if I mention it quickly. So we started this unit on, sorry, aspects of human physiology. So we did start this unit on, okay, so we did start this unit on the 13th of May. So basically, you need to be able to write these things, because they are sessions that you're attending. Now, this assignment will be due, for submission 2 weeks from now. Essentially, the idea would be to next week, we are going to try and hold an exam in the class, and also hold a practical session, so that you are all going to be invited and you are able to go through some of the instruments that we have bought, for this course, things like a microscope, octoscope, stethoscope, blood pressure monitor, blood testing machine. There are bits and pieces of thermometer and things like that, which are normally used, in the clinical settings. So here, the due date of the assignment, I would put it this way, would be, say, 15th. Got somebody joining in or what? So it will be 15th June. So if I put it this way, and then the date of submission basically would be the date on which you actually come in and sit a bit of an exam. So it's an exam wherein you'll have to, this is not a traditional assignment, and I'll explain how this will be done. Now, you'll have to do your signature here. So when we look at essentially, say, for example, writing, your details on the assignment cover sheet, just make sure that you put your name in. So if you don't have a soft copy of your signature, basically choose the name and change the font, to maybe a slightly different font, which shows that, you've signed it, or essentially it looks like more or less a signature. Then what we have to do is put the word count in. So how would you do the word count? You normally go down where you actually do your assignment. So in this case, obviously, word count might be slightly irrelevant, because when you come into this, college and obviously sit the exam, you'll be doing a handwritten exam. So we are going to go by approximate words. So normally when we write, with the pen, you normally write about 100 words a page. But generally when you're typing, essentially it will be somewhere in the region of, I would say, 125 to 150 words. So if I were to do this, as an assignment, and which I've done at my end first, and a sampler that I will provide. So what I've done is, as you can see, I've just copied and pasted that into the document. And as you would neatly see that some part of the document might need a bit of formatting to remove the space. But generally speaking, the document pretty much is come into, as I would have expected, rather than, distorting the whole, formatting of the assignment front cover sheet and everything. I'll show that to you in a second. And references, I keep it on a new page. Now, if I go up where I've started my assignment, because there are 4 questions in it, and question 1 is mandatory, but then apart from question 1, you have to either answer other 2 or other questions. So it could be question 2 and 3, it could be 2 and 4, it could be 3 and 4. That is entirely up to you in terms of how you would do it. But for the purposes of sample assignment and for the purposes of, obviously preparation, what I'm going to do is obviously provide you this, which is to give you an idea that in this assignment, this is how, you'll be looking at preparing, the answers, or at least in terms of write-up. Now, because I've done the write-up, predominantly on, Word document, this is obviously a couple of, I would say, a couple of thousands of words. I think it's about 4,500 words that I've done, because I've done all the 4 questions, so that you can then pick and choose which ones you would want to address, and then apply your own common sense to be able to, look at determining the answers. So this paper is going to be roughly about 2,000, I would say 2 hours when you sit in the class, and the idea there and thereabouts would be to basically look at writing and covering 3 questions. Question 1, which is mandatory, and out of the other 3, which is question 2, 3, and 4, you have to do at least 2 others. So it won't be that you have to cover all the questions. It is question 1 mandatory, and then 2 other optional questions. Now, if you see this, just the bit that I'm actually explaining in front of you right now, I need to take it to a new page so that it's neatly presented, as you can see. And what I'm doing is, you're writing about roughly anywhere between, I would say, 300 to 400 words, to cover each part of the question. Now, this bit, as you can see, is now fully formatted. It is not altered anything as far as, the assignment brief is concerned. And this is what we need to be able to look at when we fill these details in. Make sure that your font size here is 11. You're filling in with the same font size. Obviously, there's an indicative word limit given of 3,500, but as you can see, this is a class controlled assignment, and the duration is 2 hours. So assuming if you write about 100 words per, 100 to 200 to 250 words, which is like 2 to 2.5 pages, you would be essentially looking at, completing this assignment maybe in about 2,000 words when you write it in the class. Now, there are bits and pieces, obviously, that we are supposed to fill in. So if I have to put the word count here, I will put my word count at 4,508, because I've attempted all the questions. And how I wanted to show you is how do you go about seeing the word count is, if I go in and select whatever I've pasted into the document, this is a general, information that I'm providing. So if you look at just selecting basic bits without your references, and then I go into the tools option on the top, and then I click on word count. So in the tools option of the word count, you won't probably see this on my screen right now, but if you go and click on the file in the Word, give me 1 second. Let me just try and show the full screen. So how do you get the word count? That is what, I'm interested in showing you. So for a minute, if I go into and show you my full screen. So when you see the full screen, as you would see, how do I get to the word count? So I select the bit that I normally write in the assignment. When I select the bit when I normally write in the assignment, what I then do is basically after selecting the entire bit, I go into file or basically tools here, and in the tools you see word count. So when you click on the word count, it will show you how many words you have written. So this is the word count that I need to look at, entering. So when I look at selecting everything in terms of without references, I don't need to select references. If I go in again, select everything. And this selection that I do is only the question that I've answered. And I go into tools and I go into word count. This will pop up a window and it says 4253 words. So this is without references, 4253 words. And that is what I need to write here, 4253. And that tells me the word count. This is in general as an information, for all assignments that you are going to study. And then is where we get into the discussions of the assignment brief. So let me bring you back. So when we look at the assignment brief now, what we are looking at here is, because this is a graded unit and it is a class-based assessed exam, it will be handwritten. The credits on the unit is 6. So it is a major unit in your subject area, which is biology. And this and infectious diseases, both of them are graded units. There is only one attempt. There is no resubmission. And obviously, whatever you achieve in the first attempt is what you are going to get as a mark or as a grade. Now, if you go into little specifics of the assignment brief very quickly, it says, seen the assignment in the class during specified session, you'll be given the assignment questions at the start of the unit. You must answer question 1 and 2 other questions using diagrams as appropriate. Now, because I have, handwritten some part of the assignment, what I would need to do is be able to draw out some of the diagrams, and I'll show you what I mean by that. You should submit a reference list previously prepared according to Harvard Convention to your tutor at the end of the writing period. So basically, it's like when you sit an exam, you prepare your stuff, and what will happen is you will also prepare a reference list of what all material you have used essentially to study this particular unit and the questions that you're going to answer in the class. You will not have access to books, notes, or internet during the assignment writing time, and you may not communicate this to any other. So that means this is a individually written class exam or an assignment, and this would not be something that you are able to consult with your fellow colleagues. Now, it says question 1 and 2 other questions. So in the assignment brief, there is a question 1 given, which is mandatory. That means everybody will need to do this. And then out of question 2, 3, and 4, you have to select 2 and then do them as a part of your assignment. So you don't need to do all the 4 questions. Question 1 plus any 2 of the question 2, 3, and 4. So I can do 2 and 3, I can do 2 and 4, I can do 3 and 4. It's down to me in terms of which questions I want to look at doing. The first question talks about explain why endocrine system is ill-suited to the coordination of a reflex such as withdrawal response. And in this is the part A. So basically we'll need to address this part. And then in part B, all the 3 parts of the questions will need to be addressed, which says using an example outline the process of hormonal control, describe features of endocrine systems for a control in the example given, and using examples, explain how major organ systems in the body work together to coordinate the function. Now, this part of the question is going to essentially cover learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2. And then we go on to question 2, question 3, and question 4. Now, when we look at, submitting assignments in Ascentis, one of the main parts is that when we assess your work, and if we do find that you have not hit any of these criteria, for example, you have tried to attempt the questions, but you are not meeting any of the criteria given here, then in those cases, when you do a resubmission, for example, you did not meet this one, but you met everything else. So I'll put it this way, that you met everything else, and this part was not met, 1.4. then what will happen is when you do a resubmission, you're only addressing 1.4 in your assignment. That means maybe it was short, maybe it was not with an example, or it was not something which was asked for, and you've written too briefly about it or descriptively about it. Whatever be the case, you will only be looking at addressing, that part in the resubmission. You cannot, address or improve your work which has been submitted for the other assessed, other assessment criteria like this or this one, that I would insert a diagram or I would make it a bit better. No, that is not allowed. So essentially, when you do a resubmission or when you've been asked to resubmit, the resubmission primarily tends to be only for the task that you have not been able to meet as per the assessor. But if they feel that you met it in the first submission itself, you'll be looking at, passing the assignment and a grade would be awarded. Now, in the feedback section, what tends to happen is we'll give you some feedback here and we'll say you need to redress or you need to, attempt task 1.4. And in the second submission, if the unit is graded, we will then assign a whole overall grade to the work that you have submitted. In the first submission, you will not be getting to understand what is the grade. But in the second submission, we will then overall grade the unit. Now, if it is an ungraded unit, it will just say achieved. There is no pass, it's only achieved. Now, in the assignment brief of, the Ascentis, they have also made it clinical that the judgment on the assignment and the quality of the assignment which has been done can then be clinically graded by the assessor. So what happens is, if I look at that understanding of your subject, if your assignment is quite detailed and I feel that, your understanding of the subject is quite good and I award you a merit here, application of knowledge, I only give you a pass because you haven't included examples or diagrams. And I just get the basic, knowledge by reading that question. And then communication and presentation again is a pass simply because you have not maybe included diagrams or tables or maybe examples. And I just feel that your presentation of the assignment is basically, not meeting the criteria. When I say presentation, this is what is presentation. When you look at your assignment, some part of it is literally the presentation of how you've submitted your work. So for example, the presentation is, I make sure that the assignment is very clearly readable. There are no spelling, grammatical errors, as you would see, that I would normally see in the document. It is written in UK English, which is what we need to follow, because some of you have your assignments set on, US English. So you should be able to click on this language thing here, and it brings up a pop-up and choose United Kingdom English. Now, this bit is the bit which you are considering for the purposes of, presentation. So when I look at it as an assessor, I'm looking at, this bit, which is there are no spelling mistakes, there are no grammar mistakes. Obviously, the assignment is well formatted, well submitted in the sense that it covers the areas and it is showing a flow in terms of what the question is asking and obviously what you're essentially presenting, in the assignment. So this additional bit that you spend in terms of, formatting their work and proof checking your work to ensure that it is grammatically and, let's say, spelling wise, you've proofread your work. This tells me that there is a clear presentation and a clear, communication in terms of what has been asked for and what you've essentially presented, in the assignment. So if this bit is there, and I look at this as an example, I'm just quickly formatting it for the purposes. So again, here, the, usage of the English has to be UK English, not US English. And these are minor bits or, finer points that I or the assessors normally would pick up, and this is what will consist of giving you a grade primarily on the communication and the presentation part of the assignment. So as you can see, I'm spending about 5 minutes to basically streamline and make it much more presentable, which would mean that and shows the effort that I'm putting in to ensure that the assignment is very well communicated. It is meeting the criteria. For example, In this case, as you can see, byproducts, there will be a hyphen which will come. So I'm correcting and proofreading my own assignment as well. Spelling of oxyhemoglobin is wrong. Spelling of hemoglobin is wrong because I missed out the A here. So these are the bits that I would be looking at, correcting before I submit my assignment. So you have to spend about, 5 to 7 minutes making sure that you have read your assignment, you've, proofread it, simply because this will contribute to a graded unit. Wherever there is a graded unit, you would generally see that in the graded unit, there will be a task, there will be some weightage which will be given predominantly for the purposes of communication and presentation. So we have nearly done with this, as you can see, and then the output, you would see that the output is significantly, refined, and it shows that I have taken due care to proofread and obviously, make sure my assignment is very well presented. And there are no spelling mistakes and grammatical mistakes which are being picked up, because in the Microsoft Word document, you're able to look at clicking on this option here, which is called the editor. And as you can see, it will pick out some grammatical errors. And what I would suggest is you need to go into these and then check it. So if I click on spelling right now, obviously this is a spelling which is not there. I'll add it to my dictionary because I'm referencing, these are individual author names, which are proper verbs. So obviously they will be coming up as, not recognized in the dictionary. But as you use the word and as you keep adding, for example, words to your dictionary, you would generally see that this is something which will be, something that you're going through and you're proofreading it. And obviously, adding some of these words to ensure that, there is obviously no spelling mistake as far as, the assignment submission is concerned. So when I look at the alveolus, now all the spellings are correct. If I look at the grammar, in some cases, for example, a full stop is required and I have not put a full stop in. And these are the bits that I would primarily be looking at. I'll ignore this because this is a part of the assignment brief. But any place else that I have written, I'm going to look at, correcting all the grammatical mistakes. And this would be, then at some stage, meeting the criteria, as you can see. And then if you are, my suggestion is follow some punctuation conventions. If there are showing some errors, in some cases, it can help you substitute the close proximity. I'll leave that word as it is, ignore. And then glucose in particular is, so it says glucose is, I'll ignore that as well. And that tells me that my Word document is fully formatted, fully proofread, no grammatical mistakes, no spelling errors. And that tells me that the presentation and communication of the assignment, I would say distinction, because there are no holes that I can punch into that. And I've seen that the student is taking due care while submitting the assignment. Now, in terms of the quality, how do I judge the quality of the assignment? I cannot put any individual judgment. So what they've done is they've given, if you see the top of the assignment brief, it says grade descriptors 1, 2, 5, and 7 apply. Now, they have given very clearly these grade descriptors in the assignment brief. If I go here, it says grade profile 1, 2, 5, and 7. Now, how do I define these grade descriptors? So when I look at the first one, understanding of the subject, which is this, understanding of the subject. So when I mark the assignment, I'm taking due care and I'm assessing these to ensure that it demonstrates a good grasp of the relevant knowledge base, demonstrate good understanding of different approaches associated with the area of study. And then for distinction, excellent grasp and excellent understanding. Now I go to the second criteria. Obviously, I have to look at ideas, facts, theories, models. No, ideas, fact, theories, and concepts. I don't need to look at perspective and models here. Similarly, for distinction, these criteria have been marked. I need to check for these if they are there in the assignment brief. And I'll explain very briefly what do I mean by that. And similarly, you have communication presentation. As you can see, there are marks for formatting of your assignment, structure of assignment, use of images, language, syntax, register, spelling, punctuation, and referencing. So that is why it is very important that this bit is you put focus on it, simply because if you want to get marks, in your work, this is the area that you have to look at specifically for the graded unit, which is communication and presentation. Now in quality, it gives me some criteria which I have to look at. It is structured, the assignment flows, it is structured, there are logical arguments that you built, you have put ideas in which are not contradictory, and then you're demonstrating a very good response in terms of what is being asked for in the assignment and what you're precisely answering. And similarly for distinction, it says consistently you are being logical in the questions, there is a flow. So if I explain the respiratory system, I'm covering all the components of the respiratory system, starting with mouth, nostrils, looking at the windpipe going into lungs, alveoli, the sacs, which are microsacs, and then explaining and including maybe a diagram to say how the respiratory system works, and I've labeled those in the diagram, and they will help you build these arguments. Now, if I look at quality on the assignment in the work that I have prepared, for example, I haven't included any diagrams yet. But if I haven't included any diagrams and I look at some of the bits which are covered, I have covered them in detail, but I need to draw or include diagrams from the internet. So in this case, if I go with the current version, I'd probably award it a merit. So what I will do is, how will the overall grade of the unit be, ascertained? There'll be some comments that I'm going to put here as an assessor, but what I'll do is I'll now arrange these grades in a chronological order. So I'll start with the smallest one, pass, P, then 2 M's are there, and there is a D. So what happens is, if you see, we need to look at choosing a grade here. Now the grade is going to be the middle part, which is the middle part of the grade. So you have pass, merit, merit and distinction. Now this is an even number 4. I can't choose which grade is it. If I choose this M, it'll be primarily, left-sided. If I choose this, it'll be right-sided. So there is no middle part in this. Now, how will the grade of this assignment be decided? The grade of the assignment will be divided on the basis of what has been awarded in the quality part. If there was another parameter, assuming, just to show you as an example, if there was another parameter and that was 6, and that was say comprehension, and in this comprehensive evidence, right? And if it was like this, which was, and here I would have awarded, say, for example, a distinction. So what I would do is I would rearrange the grades, and obviously rearrange the grades in like this, because there is 1 pass, there are 2 merits and 2 distinctions. So in this case, the middle grade would become the grade that you will get on the assignment. It's as clinical. So there is no way that the assessor can actually include any form of favoritism, personal judgment into how the assignment is graded. If this was M and the 3 become M, this would still remain the same because the middle grade is M. If this was, for example, a pass, and I change this to a pass, your middle grade is still a merit. So if you see, it is as clinical in terms of, the grading part of it, assuming if it was there. Now, because there are 4 criteria in this, and the quality criteria precedes everything else. So if the quality is M, then the overall grade on this assignment that we can assign would be a merit criteria, which will be awarded. And that is why there is no resubmissions allowed in the assignment brief. So it is important that when you start an assignment, you go through the assignment brief, spend 10 minutes on it, like I've done, and then start compiling the evidence. Make sure you are at least having, if I take you to the bottom of the page, at least 10 references from where the work has been taken. It will be bibliography if you are using the material, but you're writing it in your own words, and there is no in-text, referencing done anywhere in the assignment, then this term will change to what is called bibliography. Bibliography is a list of sources that you have looked at for writing your assignment, but they have been written in your own words, and you're not using any of the author's material without altering or changing the meaning of the text. Then it becomes a bibliography. But if you have used in-text Harvard-style referencing, you have taken quotations, you have used direct quotes by, taking on definitions or, say key frameworks, and you cannot alter the meaning, you cannot rewrite them. In those cases, that would be treated as references. And here you could have the word references first. So normally what tends to happen is you write the references first, and then later on, references normally consists of books, it'll consist of journals and articles, because you're taking the material as it is from there. Bibliography normally consists of, also in addition to books, journals, and articles, it will also include websites. So here, websites, blogs, anything which is electronically published material will all come under kind of websites. And you would also, in addition to mentioning this, if it was a website, for example, I have taken some material today from another website, and that website, for example, is a website like this. So here, what I need to do is, apart from putting the link, so here the source was endocrine system, SYSTM. I'll put this as the source. Then what I also need to do is put in square brackets, what and when was it assessed on? When did I access this particular material? If I have accessed this material from the website on 27th of May, then this is what I will also need to put for website references. This is something that if you look at when you go to university, at some stage, you'll have all the three types of references provided in your work, and these referencing will need to be labeled, under in this format. So you'll put references, you'll start with bibliography, you'll go to references, or the other way around, you'll start with references, put bibliography, and then put websites. And in general, most cases, you would need to have about 10 to 15 references, or a combination of the three, but 10 to 15 of them to be able to successfully get a higher grade in your assignments. So my suggestion on this would be to look at making sure that you put this kind of an effort in. Now, this is how we normally put it. We'll miss out the word reference, websites here. And even when you do this on the Word document and you use references, go to choose your references, Harvard Anglia. Then if you click on insert citation, the references which the Word document draws up for you will be done in an alphabetical order. As you can see, they are not in alphabetical order. So it's M, L, it'll be chronologically like in the alphabetical order. And this is what the Word or my Google documents, if you use those, would be able to do so when you look at, compiling the list of your references. So these are important bits that you have to look at in terms of assignment. I don't want, we are having already a lot of issues, and I'm returning some of the assignments which are being submitted as PDF documents, or, they are very poorly formatted, because we don't want to be spending time on this. This is the time that you need to spend on. And if I get an assignment which does not have the bit which has a marking bit on communication and presentation, and an assignment has been submitted which is not meeting the criteria, I'm going to only give a pass here, and that would mean you will not be able to score a higher grade on that particular unit. So this is the bit that you need to look at in the assignment, as the first part. Now, let's go into the details of, obviously what is required to be done. And for the assignment brief, as I mentioned to you, there are 4 questions. The first question essentially talks about explain why the endocrine system is ill-suited to the coordination of a reflex such as withdrawal response. Now, this is a question wherein it is asking you that why is the endocrine system not fit to coordinate a reflex response such as a response such as a reflex, and in the reflex we are looking at a withdrawal response. So what we need to understand in this is, what is first a reflex action? Say for example, if somebody is trying to hit you, or if somebody is trying to come near you and you feel intimidated, what you will do is you'll basically move your hand, or you'll basically move away from that person. So what your body is doing is anticipating a response, and to which it creates a reflex saying that, okay, either you move your hand, or, you shrug the person with the hand to say, don't come near me, or, you basically move away, change, or, walk away, or, take a few steps back or change your position, as an example of reflex. So reflex actions are usually what are called withdrawal responses. Now, these are all controlled primarily through your spinal reflex, because they are involuntary. Your body and your nervous system will essentially, automatically detect fight or fear and flight or fear, and what it will do is prepare the body to provide a response. Now, these are provided and are termed as withdrawal responses. They are basically spinal reflex responses which are designed to protect the body from potentially damaging stimuli. So if you're trying to jump from a cliff, and if you're trying to jump from a cliff, what will happen is, and if the height of the cliff is too high, you would generally feel that there are certain bits in your body which are asking you or telling you responses that you should not jump, or there is a bit of a fear, nervousness in terms of taking that jump if you have not done it before. So these kind of responses are normally accompanied by quick neuro, signals, which are capable of processing or helping the adapting the body to these kind of situations. Now, these responses tend to be quite fast, because the body is to the system, which is the spinal reflex system, or part of your nervous system, the spine side of things. They need to be able to ensure that your body is protected. I'll give you a simple example. When you try and jump, I don't know how many of you have tried this, but if you've looked at situations wherein you're trying to do this for the first time, and there is you have not tried this before, what tends to happen is, say, for example, when you jump into water, and if you're jumping from a, say, 2-meter or 3-meter high platform into a swimming pool, your first reflex action your body does is it closes your eyes. So I don't know how many have realized, but if you're jumping, your eyes normally would be closed. You'd not be opening your eyes. And because it's something which is happening in micro milliseconds, and it could be the body straight away looks at getting into this response, wherein it is trying to prevent any injury which can happen to any of the, say, for example, body organs. And this is an involuntary response. So there are other responses that you would normally have or experience, which could be a bit slower than this kind of a response. And that is where the endocrine system normally would, release a chemical or a hormone in your body, and that would allow you to adjust to that environment. And then it will be basically controlled through a reflex reaction. So this chemical messaging, which tends to happen through endocrine system, is basically the transportation of hormones, for example, adrenaline, and they would be, secreted from various glands in the endocrine system. And that would then be circulated through the blood into the body, and that would help prepare your body for responses. But for example, another example that I'll give you here, and that is why it is not suited endocrine system. So if you're playing football, and imagine if you're playing football, or you're playing an active sport, what tends to happen is you are dealing with situations as it is. Now your body is not, your mind is not controlling these responses. You are basically, these responses, which are involuntary responses, are being controlled through the spine or the peripheral nervous system. So then the nervous system, I don't know how many you recall, we have the central nervous system and we have the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system, which is based in the spinal cord, is basically conducting these responses. And these responses are basically quicker ways through which the neural signaling can happen within the body. And that is why endocrine system is not suited for such kind of reflex actions, wherein your body needs to react pretty much immediately with speed to be able to prevent any injury to the body. And that is what you need to cover in this particular assignment. So when we look at in particular responses, what I would want to do is
yourself on a stove.
So
what happened when you put your hand on the stove when it was hot?
So
did you have to say
what I want to do is basically show you a small video which you should be able to see and understand why this kind of a response can happen. So let me try and play this video on YouTube, if I can get that. Give me 1 second. And this would help you understand in terms of, why sometimes you see the peripheral nervous system taking over, the responses in your body. And this is primarily to ensure that it is able to, protect the body against, these quicker reactions or reflexes which are required in order to ensure that it minimizes any chance of any injury, predominantly on, the human body. So there are lots and lots of different videos. And what I want to do is maybe show you one in particular, which will highlight, 1 second. Let me just try and see if I can get hold of anything. So either ways, okay, because, I think because we're recording the session, so I'm going to try and share a link with you, which you can look at, a bit later, keeping in mind copyright issues, because on YouTube, sometimes we have issues with regards to, copyright material. So I need to look at a particular video, which primarily is available, under the copyright licensing as a video that we can use or freely share, while recording this session. But I will include a link, and that would essentially be something that I will show you before the end of the session. So now what I've done is, what I've explained in terms of the response to the first question is what I've mentioned, why it is not endocrine system is suitable, why is it not suitable. So I've talked about certain parameters like speed, specificity, integration, and duration. And this has helped me build arguments to say why the endocrine system is not suitable for, looking at reflex responses or responses wherein, it is important for the body to provide an instantaneous response as against, a response which can be provided or the body adjusts over a period of time. A simple example that there are lots of examples. You have to think of situations. Another simple example that I would quote here would be, assuming you say you are in the house, and assuming it is winters, you are in the house. What happens is you suddenly decide that you have to step out to get something from the garden, and you do not put on any warm clothing, and you have to be in the garden for a couple of minutes. Say, for example, you are getting some wood for your log burner, or you're bringing out something from the garage, but you have not prepared yourself in terms of your body, in terms of either wearing a warm covering or some sort of a jacket or a coat. And you just decide, you do open the door and you go out and you say, it'll not take that much time, let me go and get it. But it's freezing outside. So what will happen is you go outside, you'll start to slowly and gradually feel cold, and your body is there adjusting to regularize or normalize the temperature, so that you don't feel cold or you don't start sneezing. Now, this kind of a response will be done by the endocrine system because it will release a hormone or a chemical from the body, and that chemical from the body will start, doing its bit. It will not be an immediate action, but it will start fighting the cold. And what will happen is at some stage, you would start to feel that, okay, you sneezed a couple of times, but your body tends to adjust to that temperature because you're not going to be out for long. And in this case, this kind of a response, which happens gradually. Now, it is happening in milliseconds and seconds, but it is the effect of this response is happening gradually on your body, and your body is getting accepted. This will be a response which will come from the endocrine system. But if you imagine that there are situations in which you put a hand over your stove or a gas pipe, and you pick up a hot pan, you straight away drop it because your hands will straight away release it. This kind of a reaction will typically happen from the peripheral nervous system. And this will be an involuntary response because your body will straight away react. You will not even know and think what has happened, because what you realized is when you pick up the hot pan, your skin feels hot and your hand feels a burning sensation. You immediately drop the pan, and that would be a response which will be coming in to save any burns or your fingers or your skin might get burned. And in order to save or avoid any such damage to the body, the peripheral nervous system through the spinal cord will actually look at this involuntary response, and this will be more or less immediate. It'll be immediate to the fact that trying to prevent any harm to it. and it will withdraw, create a response which will do a withdrawal. And this is where the endocrine system will not be suited to do or perform this reflex action. Is that okay? Is that clear enough?
Yes.
Then we'll go. Okay, that's great. So let's go on to the second part of the question, which says, using an example, outline the process of hormonal control. Now, if I look at this process of hormonal control, what we need to be able to do is here explain how would the hormones be secreted in the body. So if we look at the hormonal control and how this happens, what we look at is we have to take an example here. Now, generally speaking, when are hormones released? When there are functions in your body which are basically not happening as per regular or a normal mechanism. So the endocrine system here basically looks at regulating the chemicals or your chemical messengers or hormones in the body. And they would, when I say they, I mean organs in the endocrine system would be looking at continuously getting feedback from the human body, various places in the human body. And what they will then do is basically release these chemicals in order to regulate, the normal body functions. Now, when they do this, these are what are called feedback loops. So in your body, and I don't know in terms of if you recall, if I just show you an image of endocrine system diagram, if I look at, is a meshwork of diagram which basically has all the veins and other bits obviously going into, and they act as sensory let's say pick up all the sensory signals which are required to be picked up from the body. So when I look at the endocrine system in general, they consist of different glands, and these different glands for male and female are slightly different when we talk about the reproductive system. But generally speaking, what you will see is these are the kind of glands that are normally there in your endocrine system. So things like a pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary, parathyroid, thyroid, thymus, adrenal glands, pancreas, kidneys, ovaries, and testes. Now, these glands are glands which basically provide signals or feedback into the body. And when we look at this, system, this is the system which helps us perform the regulation of hormones in our body in particular. So when we talk about this, we will have to show how the hormones in the body would get secreted and where all they will control the function of maintaining the chemical equilibrium within the body. So one such big and very commonly used example is your blood glucose. If you eat a lot of sugary food, your sugar in the blood starts to rise. Now, increased levels of sugar over a prolonged period of time, lead to type 2 diabetes. So there are two, hormones that we looked at when we looked at studying endocrine system. There is glucagon and there is insulin. So if there is too much sugar in the body, then insulin is released, by your pituitary gland. Signals will basically go, and this will trigger the release of insulin, from your one of your, what do you call the endocrine glands. Now, when we talk about insulin is released by pancreas. Now, when we talk about, sugar levels being low and your body is, aiming or, asking for more sugar to be released, because when you have less sugar, you feel lazy, lethargic, weak, sleepy. And if you have more sugar, you feel more active. But obviously, more sugar over a period of time can lead to, a permanent sugar condition called type 2 diabetes. Now, glucagon as a, hormone is also secreted by what do you call pancreas, basically pancreas, but this is secreted by the alpha cell in pancreas. And when we talk about insulin, this is secreted by the beta cells in pancreas. Now, in order to maintain the sugar balance within your body, because sugar balance is also required to keep some of the other normal body functionals going. So this is regulated through the release of hormones in your body. So when we look at the release of hormones in your body, what we are looking at is either insulin or glucagon will be released. And how would that be triggered? It will be triggered through a stimulus. Now, stimulus would be that your body is craving to have sugar. That is why you have the urge, sometimes you have the urge to eat food or you drink water. So you have to explain with the help of an example. It says using an example, you have to explain a particular, example of an endocrine system and how that particular hormone, would be looking at being released, or, looking at this chemical messenger, which is, or hormone, which is released, and it helps in controlling the sugar in your body. So what I've done in this question is taking the example of regulation of blood sugar levels. I have explained, the process of how hormonal control of insulin and glucagon happens. Now, there are several examples that you can look at. So when I talk about hormonal control, you can look at the pH level in your body, the level of potassium in your body, the level of sodium in your body, the salt in your body, and they are basically all going to be regulated by, hormonal controls, or basically, triggers that are basically going to be used or basically released by the endocrine glands as far as this is concerned. Now, in the case of men, testosterone; in the case of women, estrogen normally gets released when you see ovulation happening. So there is an increase of estrogen in the human body, in the female human body, and that leads to the increase of levels of estrogen till the ovulation happens. So whichever example you pick out, whether it's pH control in the body, blood sugar levels, you look at the estrogen or the testosterone in the body, looking at one of the examples, potassium or regulation of sodium, one of the examples has to be quoted here, and then you have to explain that example in terms of how the endocrine system gets into action by basically looking at controlling, this in the body. Now, this is specifically something which was discussed, and I have included 3 or 4 examples that I've spoken about in the learning outcome, 2 of the presentation, or learning outcome 1 of the presentation, in part 2, when we discuss the endocrine system. And that would help you answer this particular side of the question. So what you need to be able to remember is that there are certain features of the endocrine system, and then using an example, you talk about the feedback loop, and that is something which I've covered, and you should go through this in a bit more detail in the handout as well, and you should be in a position to write it in your own words when we look at the exam simulation, for this particular assignment. Now, part 3 of the question is explaining, again, using more examples, explain how major organ systems in the body work together. Now, there was a specific video shown in part 3 of the discussion that we did on learning outcome 1. And we talked about a number of other different types of, organ systems in the body. So there are 7 basics that we studied: respiratory, cardiovascular, nervous, endocrine, excretory, and I think urinary, so excretory system. Now, apart from that, we also looked at other systems, which are nervous system, peripheral and central nervous system, muscular system. We looked at respiratory and so I gave examples here in terms of which 2 systems can work together, right? If you have a cramp in your body, your nervous system and muscular system will work, but that has got nothing to do with respiratory system or, a digestive system. So here you have to talk about 2 systems. This was covered in learning outcome 2 under the process of homeostasis. You have to talk about 2 different types of systems and how they work together. And that has to be explained, in using an example of a particular function. And as long as you are able to do that, so what I've done is there are 13 total systems, I think 12 or 13 total systems in our human body. And what I've done is I've clubbed 2 of them together wherein we get to see. So muscles and bones work together, endocrine and reproductive system, hormones released for the, regulation of testosterone or estrogen, they work together. Digestive and circulatory system, peristalsis, absorption of nutrients into the bloodstream, they work together. Respiratory and circulatory system work together, exchange of gases in the lungs through the microsac alveoli, and nervous and muscular system work together. So these are examples that I've taken. You can choose one of them and elaborate in a bit more detail by explaining one of the functions, and that would help you cover, the part 3 of the question 1. Now, in question 2, 3, and 4, you have to cover one of them. You don't need to answer, 2 of them. You don't need to answer all the 3. You need to cover 2 of them. So our question 2 talks about outlining the process of starch breakdown in the digestive system. So when we talk about the outlining of starch breakdown in the digestive system, Here is where you need to talk about, the two enzymes which are released, in the stomach by bile, by pancreas, and they talk about, enzymes like isomaltase and glucomycase. So these two enzymes basically need to be discussed in the outline of how starch is broken down in the body. And this process through which it is broken down into the body is basically called, the digestive process. So when we start the process of starch breakdown in our digestive system, it involves obviously several steps. And these several steps is what I've mentioned here. So you start with the mouth, wherein the ingestion, that means you're putting the food in your mouth, happens. And here the food is then dissolved with your saliva. There are enzymes which are released by your salivary glands, and these salivary gland enzymes tend to be amylase or stylin, and they break down the starch, start breaking down the starch into smaller molecules called maltose. And this process of chewing, of mixing the food with your saliva and release of the enzyme is basically happening in the mouth. Then I go into esophagus, which is your food pipe. So here the starch is being contracted, compressed, and using the process of peristalsis, the food is going down your food pipe. And this is starting the process of digestion because it is pushing the food into stomach. Now, when it enters the stomach releases a lot of, say, for example, so in the chemical reactions, if I look at, there is chemical reaction of salivary release of enzymes, which is salivary maltase. And in the stomach, you have lots of chemical which are released, juices which are released, which try and break down the starch in the food or in the nutrient. And the stomach starts to pound them, let's say the food that you've taken into, by pounding it, by breaking it down into smaller and smaller particles or molecules. At some stage, pancreas will release amylase, which is a digestive enzyme which comes into after the food passes from your stomach into the small intestine, and this will then start breaking down starch into its individual components like maltose, maltose, and dextrin. These are the three main components. Now, what is the starch going to produce? Finally, your body is interested in getting glucose from it, sugar from it, essentially. And then you have the brush border enzymes, which are enzymes which are released in the small intestine. You basically explain these: maltase, isomaltase, sucrase, and then finally lactase. These are enzymes which are going to basically break down the starch into, its basic components. And this is where the main part of the digestive system, that what you're explaining, the breaking down of starch, is actually being explained by the use of 4 different enzymes: maltase, isomaltase, sucrase, and lactase. And this then leads to the creation of smaller molecules, which is then absorbed into the, into the blood. Now, where is starch coming from? Lactase is the enzyme which is, which basically is produced in milk. And this would then finally help final products of starch like glucose, fructose, and galactose to be absorbed into the small intestine and the digestive process, then excreting the waste part of it through your large intestine, finally through urethra, and then through the anus, and it goes out as, your poo. So this process that you will need to explain is going to be covering the breakdown of starch by the digestive system. So you have to cover key components of the digestive system. You have to cover the chemical reaction which will happen, at what stages it will happen, how would the absorption happen, how would the transportation and utilization happen, and then finally, how does the food get, the starch gets converted into micromolecules of glucose, lactase, and fructase to get absorbed into or lactase to get absorbed into your body. Now, the second part of the question is, it says, describe how alimentary canal is adapted to absorb products of digestion. So the alimentary canal, basically, when we talk about, you need to be very clear that what is alimentary canal. So when we talk about alimentary canal, this is the small, villi or small surface lining the small intestine. And they are basically what is sometimes also called as the gastrointestinal tract. Now, this is a long tube, which basically is from your mouth going into, the stomach, and is a part of your digestive system. And the absorption of nutrients typically tend to happen in microvilli, which are basically specialized structures that would be finely covering the inner lining of this to be able to absorb, the food into the small intestine and into the large intestine. So this is what you would need to explain in this part of the question, and what kind of enzymes are released. And you're covering some of the main parts, things like what is the surface area, villi and microvilli. You're looking at covering, the thin and permeable walls of epithelial cells, blood supply and lymphatic supply, how the blood then helps the meshwork of blood vessels helping, essentially the food and the nutrients to be absorbed in the digestive tract. Then the specialized transport mechanism, which basically talks about, how the food is pushed down into the alimentary canal, and where different types of acids, enzymes are released, and the absorption of glucose or blood glucose essentially tends to happen. And then secretory functions, which would mean any sort of residual water, juices, other bits, which are important for the body for nutrients, are absorbed, and then the waste is basically, pushed through the alimentary canal into the large intestine, finally into the urethra, and then through the anus it is excreted out of your body. This part is going to be looking at explaining the function of peristalsis that we have discussed, which is the rhythmic contraction of smooth muscles in your body, in the alimentary canal in particular. And this movement helps mix food with the digestive enzymes, the various chemicals which are released in the stomach, pancreatic juice, bile juice, and then into the small intestine, which facilitates also, because the food becomes, gooey or mucus-like, it also facilitates the transfer of the food from within the alimentary canal, digestive tract into the flow, and then the flow is maintained, and obviously it goes into small intestine, large intestine. Finally, the waste material is then excreted from the body. And this process is what you would need to explain what the alimentary canal does in question 2, part 2, which is a specialized function of absorption of products, I would say, which are useful micronutrients, which are digested in your in the body in this particular process, and leads to the absorption into the bloodstream, which is then required, and the blood then flows throughout the body to be able to provide nourishments to all the cells and organs in the body. We look at question 3 very briefly. It talks about, how you would look at the structure of alveoli. So when we talk about the structure of alveoli, what we are essentially meaning here is, when we talk about the structure of microsacs, what are alveolus and alveoli? They are basically cup-shaped thin walls, like air sacs, which are present within your lungs, within the blood vessels, where the exchange of oxygen or the gases happen within the, when you do breathing. So this part of the question 3 is focused on respiratory system and the structure of respiratory system. So here, what I would suggest is you would need to explain the structure of respiratory system in terms of what all it consists of. So it consists of lungs, which are lined by alveoli, which is the specialized, structure or tiny air sacs, which are present as, within your lung. They have endings which are called bronchioles. And I hope if you have studied the handout which are provided of respiratory system, these bronchioles basically branch into what are called, which are basically branches within the alveoli and alveolus. Alveoli is plural, alveolus is singular. And then they are basically like air sacs which help in the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide within the lungs. They are present within the lungs, and the exchange of gases. When I say gases, I mean carbon dioxide and oxygen happens between the lungs and in the bloodstream. So the structure of alveoli is very closely related to, and you would, various parts that you will need to explain, things like the thin walls of the lung lining in terms of large surface area, which is basically bronchioles. Then we are talking about the capillary network, which is the blood vessels, which diffuse into the alveoli and allow in the process of exchange of gases. And the exchange of gases happens through the process of diffusion into the blood capillaries. And this environment is a moist environment because as diffusion of gases requires, the environment to be moist. That means the surface of the alveoli are lined by something, which is primarily moist substance. And this creates a membrane which allows the process of diffusion to happen. A simple example that I would look at when when we were in A levels and obviously did experimentation, we had used what is called something called a clotting paper. Sometimes when we see now, we use paper napkins essentially. So if you spill water, coffee, or things on the table by accident, what tends to happen is you straight away use a napkin, paper napkin, or a tissue. And the reason why you use that is when you put that in, you would see the process of diffusion. So if you put a paper napkin on the surface area where the water is spilled, or a tea is or coffee is spilled, you would see if you put that on, the napkin slowly starts to absorb all the material which has got spilled. It'll absorb to an extent wherein the surface area is dry, and when it becomes fully wet, it will no longer have the capacity to be able to absorb. So this area of lungs is like that, wherein a thin layer of fluid acts as a bit of a coolant or some sort of a surface liquid, which basically helps this process of absorption or exchange of gases through the process of diffusion. So this bit you will need to explain, and this would help you cover the overall structure of alveoli. So basically talking about the structure would include thin walls, large surface area, the capillary network, the moist environment, the microphages or the bronchioles, which basically which facilitates the diffusion of these gases. And as long as you're able to explain the components of the alveoli, this would allow you to explain this particular topic, question part 1. The second question talks about describe how circulatory and respiratory system work together. So this is going to be going into a bit of detail, because when we talked about part 3 of question 1, as you would see, it had asked you to compare 2 major organ systems in the body and how they coordinate. But if you take question, if you go on to question 2 and then question 3, and you take the second part of the question, you would see that what you've explained in question 1, it makes perfect sense for you to look at taking question 3, because part of what you have written would need to be explained, but here need to be explained in a bit more detail by going into some of the major components of circulatory and respiratory system. So it will be an add-on explanation that you've done in question 1. And what you need to do is maybe take an example of how the 2 systems are working together. So you talk about pulmonary ventilation, oxygen transport, and how the oxygen is transported through the various parts of the body through the blood. And that bit, if you explain, would help you cover, the relationship or the close working between how circulatory and respiratory system, work together, how the exchange of gases happen, oxygen being absorbed, carbon dioxide being released, and then this being taken over by blood, which basically then circulates to the body, relates to the heart, wherein the impure blood with carbon dioxide goes out, and then the pure blood with oxygen is pumped into the body, and that would help explain, this particular process. Now, if you look at the last question very briefly, last question consists of, I think 2 parts. It basically says, reference to the excretory system, explain the following terms. So here you're looking at explaining the 3 terms which are there: ultrafiltration, selective reabsorption, and excretion. So these have to be covered in definition part of it. This is a good question to pick up because it's simple to write, and it is only asking for explaining these terms. So as long as you can explain the terms in a bit of detail, like 50 odd words, this 25 to 30 to 50 words, they would help you complete the first part of the task: ultrafiltration, secretory absorption, and excretion. Then the second part of the question covers describe. So here you have to write a bit more, 100 to 150 words. If you're writing it on paper as a written test, it will say describe how structures of nephron. Now, when I talk about the structure of nephron, anybody recalls where do we find nephrons? Nephrons are a part of which system? Any idea? Nephrons are a part of which organ system in the body? So when we talk about nephrons, what we are looking at is nephrons are present in kidney. So they are, and the hint that you get is from the question itself, because it talks about excretory system. You can quickly relate to what are the various components in the excretory system. So when we talk about the components of the excretory system, we are looking at, say for example, kidney. We are looking at urethra. When you talk about anus, it's things like urinary bladder where your pee is stored. These are bits that you are going to be talking about in the excretory system. So even main components will be typically kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. But there are other systems, as I mentioned, two systems also work together. So when we talk about, say, for example, digestive system, you'll have liver also playing a part in the excretion because it produces bile, and this does not, although directly lead to or working of the excretory system, but it creates a chemical which is called bile, and this plays a crucial role in excretion because it eliminates and extracts any sort of waste products that can be detrimental to the body. So it basically gets rid of toxin. Kidneys, if I look at, is a direct function because kidneys is basically, they're also called filtration units. They filter out basically your blood in the body. They are responsible for ensuring that any sort of urea, acid, or any material which is going to be detrimental to your organ are basically filtered through the kidney. So they are a primary organ in the excretory system. And nephrons, when we talk about, they are essentially related to the functions of the kidney because their kidney is made up of nephrons essentially. So when we say kidney is made up of nephrons, they are actually the main part of the kidney, which basically are used as filters to filter the water and waste substances from the body, and then the body excretes it out as urine. Now, this question is focused on you explaining the structure of nephron. So if I bring something over, if some of you recall, the let's say the structure of the kidney. Now, if I bring a better image of structure of the kidney, it is where this is going to be useful for you because this is where you need to look at explaining the functions of nephron. So kidney, the main bits within the kidney when you look at, are going to be, this is the structure of the kidney or anatomy of the kidney. And the basic part of the kidney is made up of what is called nephrons. So when we talk about the two kidneys in the human body, we are looking at explaining what would be the specialized functions of nephrons that and what role do they play, especially when we talk about the process of excretion or filtration in particular. And that is where you would need to cover the various components of the nephrons, which include glomeruli, which is a plural, glomerulus is a singular, the Bowman's capsule, which is an important component of the kidney. And then we talk about the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule, and the loop of Henle, which essentially is the lining, which basically is the connecting vessel, which basically takes all the waste material, to the urethra. And this bit is explained in the handout which I've given for the excretory system. And this would have to be summarized in your own language, making sure that you're covering the structures, important structures of the kidney, which are basically nephrons, and how they are helping. This important structure is actually helping the kidney perform its function of filtration. And this would be covered in the last part of your question, which is question 4, part 2. So most of this particular assignment is going to come from the handouts which are provided. And it is important for you to study these handouts simply because these handouts would be providing the detailing that we have covered in the videos that we have looked at, and obviously, in the discussions that we've done through the presentation. So you will need to, if I summarize, you would need to look at doing question 1, which is mandatory. And then out of question 2, 3, and 4, you have to do or attempt any 2 questions. For some of you, we are going to be looking at doing this next week in the class, wherein it is going to be like an exam or a handwritten assignment. And in some cases, for distance learning, people you are going to be, or students who are on distance learning, they would need to look at basically submitting an assignment wherein they do assignment question 1, or question 2, 3, or 3 and 4, or 2 and 4, depending on which you want to pick for the purposes of writing this assignment. Is that okay? Any questions, any queries on this so far?
No, everything's okay, Aman.
Okay.
I'm okay. I am okay.
That's great. So basically what I will do is I will save this as a sample assignment, which will be there for discussions. And my session would be, you'll be able to refer to this, assignment on Moodle. So this will be available as a sample assignment. And what my session would be to go through the handouts in a bit more detail before you start attempting it, because it is important for you to understand the questions and what it is asking specifically to do. So it is about going into the detailing of the systems, and in terms of people who are going to do it as handwritten, the diagrams wise, if you want to look at higher grade, obviously you should be in a position to draw out a diagram. So make sure you do a bit of practice, and some part of this can be included and as images. And the reason I haven't done this as images in the questions is primarily because this is going to be an exam kind of a simulated assignment. So it will depend on your creative skills in terms of how you draw out the main parts of the endocrine system, or maybe the excretory system, or maybe the structure of alveolus or the microsacs within the lungs, and in some cases the nephrons, the structure of the nephron, which is important. So within the kidney, structure of nephron diagram will need to be looked at, and that would be something which will be important from a point of view of deriving quality into the assignment. So if I go into maybe an insert a page here, and I look at a structure of a nephron, if I pull something out, this is an image which I would look at, which is basically going to be the structure of nephrons. So if I put this out, something that you need to be aware of, something that you need to be looking at in particular. So if you are going to draw it out, structure of alveolus, or when we talk about the structure of alveolus in terms of microsacs, if I insert another page, so maybe do a bit of practice at your end. Micro detailing might not be required, because when you're drawing it out, you are basically looking at explaining what is the structure. So some part of the diagrams that you look at in the handout, or essentially in the let's say in the exam, this is the structure of the alveolus, which is basically explaining how how the lining is providing the diffusion, where the capillary endings, so the framework is there, how the alveoli and the microsacs, bronchioles essentially help in the exchange of oxygen with carbon dioxide in the body. So maybe some part of it would be to look at the research that you would need to do. So if I delete this image and I bring this across, as you would see, it presents you a bit of an idea. And this image is something that you should be able to draw out in the exam, or in the assignment, and that would be giving you the quality which is required. So one is nephron in one of the questions, the other was alveoli, which we have looked at. I'm just looking at if there is any other structure. So alimentary canal. So if I look at the structure of alimentary canal, and I want to maybe bring out this which is also going to be, so we are looking at the human body in any case. So when I look at the structure of the alimentary canal in human body, we should have a very simple image that we should be able to draw. Obviously, there are complex images available, But when I look at a very simple image of the alimentary canal, in my case, I could draw up something like this. If I again insert a page here, just for the purposes of, exam. So if I look at something like this is a very basic image of alimentary canal that I can see, I should be able to draw. So maybe explain oral cavity, transport passage, and the gastrointestinal, tract. But there are complex images also available, which might be slightly difficult to draw. But with practice, obviously, it will be helpful. You don't need to draw up any sort of, the structure of the body or anything like that. But general bit would be to, be able to explain what is the, the structure of specifically the alimentary canal. So if I bring out something which I looked at specifically for the purposes of alimentary canal, this is what I would, primarily look at. So if I delete this and I bring across the, structure of the alimentary canal, which I looked at. So this is maybe a easier image to look at. But there are lots of different types which are typically available. And there is another image which I was trying to look at, from a point of view of how simple it should be to explain, the structure of alimentary canal. If you want to look at where all does it flow within the body and how does it flow into the body, then, a very simple and a rudimentary diagram would be like this. We draw something like this, which says esophagus, which is the lining, the food pipe, which is lined by the alimentary canal. In the stomach, the fine lining of the stomach is alimentary canal, and within the other organs like large and small intestine, this gives us a very good idea in terms of what is the alimentary canal. So I don't think there are other questions in which, obviously you have to look at images or diagrams. But generally speaking, in the case of, the endocrine system and the reflex, I have a video which I want to show you. And that would also be, that is not something that you would probably look at drawing. But here, these three questions in particular would look at, having a bit of a diagram which will affect the quality of your assignment. And I've included them here. So as long as you are able to draw these in some shape or form by neatly labeling the key components of a nephron in one of the questions, the alveoli in the another question, and the alimentary canal, I think they should be good enough, to explain and show that you have full knowledge about what you're providing in terms of, evidence within the assignment. So I'll save that, and obviously I will make sure that you are able to see this assignment pretty much straight away after the, session onto Moodle. So this brings us to the end of this particular unit, and I hope that you are able to, obviously then submit the assignment by 15 June for those of you who are going to be attempting it now. And that would mean that once we get the assignment, we'll be looking at marking it for people who are doing it at distance learning. But for those of you, we're going to send out a time and some details of next Friday, which will allow essentially, because it's half term, I think most of you should be able to attend. You would be looking at coming to the center. We'll have a bit of a demonstration on some of the key devices that we bought. And then also looking at, you being able to use some of these devices while you're up here. And then second part would be the part which is looking at, making sure that you are, going through this particular part of the written exam. So thank you so much for joining, and I will catch up with you next week, Friday, and then I will send out a schedule to start a unit next week, which is Saturday and Sunday 9 a.m. as we have discussed and fixed on the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.